The studio lights blazed overhead, but the real heat came from the silence between them. Pam Bondi leaned forward across the polished desk, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Mr. Traoré," she began, enunciating each syllable like a reprimand, "you come here preaching justice and sovereignty. But let's be honest, you rose through a coup, not a constitution. You don't follow the law, you rewrite it." Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He sat with the posture of someone who had been accused many times, but condemned by none who mattered to him. His hands folded calmly on the table, his eyes fixed on Bondi's with the quiet fire of a man who'd walked through storms most couldn't survive. Pam wasn't done. She turned to the camera, a glint in her eye. "This is America," she declared. "Here, the law is sacred. Here, we don't follow men, we follow order." She pointed directly at him. "And that's what you need to learn." The audience stirred, sensing something rising in the air, something electric, something off-script. Traoré finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in, not to retaliate, but to dismantle. His voice, when it came, was deep and measured. "You shout about law as if it were holy," he said. "But I've seen your laws change with your politics. One president pardons, another punishes. One court uplifts, another buries." Pam blinked, just once, but it was enough. He had touched the wire. "You don't follow law," Traoré continued. "You follow advantage. And when people like me stand up, suddenly your law becomes a weapon. Not a shield." The audience was quiet now, too quiet. Pam raised her hand, as if to interject. But Traoré cut through it without raising his voice. "We follow truth," he said. "Not orders." And in that moment, the power shifted, not through noise, but through clarity. Pam Bondi had come to confront. Traoré had come to define. Pam Bondi tried to regain control. She tapped her papers, leaned back in her chair with a calculated smile, and said, "Truth, Mr. Traoré, is subjective. That's why we have institutions. Courts. Laws. Judges. Otherwise, we fall into chaos." She let the word chaos hang in the air like an accusation. Traoré didn't look away. "And yet, it was your institutions that justified slavery. Your courts that upheld segregation. Your judges that turned their faces away while your bombs fell on children thousands of miles away. Was that order?" He paused. "Or just your version of it?" A subtle gasp rippled through the audience. Pam's smile tightened. "You're comparing ancient history to modern governance?" "No," he said. "I'm comparing masks to mirrors." That line struck deeper than she anticipated. Pam shifted, adjusting her mic. "You have no right to question America's institutions. You're here because we allowed it. We invited you." Traoré's response was colder this time. "You didn't invite me. You summoned me, expecting gratitude." He leaned slightly forward. "You thought I'd bow?" Pam's fingers curled slightly on the desk. Her smile was gone. Traoré glanced around the studio, not for applause, but to ensure his words landed. "I came not to thank you," he said, "but to tell you, the world no longer orbits around your approval." A few murmurs in the audience. No one looked away. Bondi crossed her arms. "So now you speak for the world?" "No," Traoré said. "But I speak for a people who've been silenced long enough. And when we speak, we don't seek permission." The producer behind the glass wall looked panicked. The segment had gone off the rails, but ratings were spiking. Pam tried one last pivot. "We're just trying to help you govern responsibly." Traoré looked at her like someone staring through a wall of arrogance. "If help means control," he said, "then we've had enough of your generosity." The moderator, sweating beneath the studio lights, cleared his throat and tried to steer the broadcast back on course. "Let's focus on international cooperation," he offered meekly, glancing at both guests. "Surely, there's common ground." "There is," Traoré interrupted, eyes still locked on Bondi. But it can't be built on condescension. Pam scoffed, a dry, rehearsed sound. So now honesty is condescension? No, Traoré said sharply. Pretending to help while really dictating? That's condescension. She leaned in, voice sharper now. We send aid. We send infrastructure teams. We send advisors. Do you think we do that for fun? He didn't hesitate. No. You do it to maintain leverage. To turn help into chains. A hush swept through the studio. Even the lights seemed to pause. Traoré continued, calm and cutting, when you say aid, you mean debt. When you say training, you mean surveillance. And when you say democracy, you mean obedience. Bondi laughed, but there was no humor in it. So, what? You want to tear down every institution, start from scratch? Run your countries with rage and pride? No, Traoré said. We want to run them with dignity. And that starts by not taking instructions from those who never respected us. There it was, another hit. Pam opened her mouth, but Traoré cut in again. You speak of law. Tell me, what law gave your companies the right to strip our land? What law protects the hands that bled us dry, but punishes us when we try to stand? She blinked. You're twisting history. I'm living in its shadow, Traoré answered. Then he leaned back and added with striking clarity, and I won't pretend the sun is rising just because you say it is. It was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. And the audience, both in the studio and beyond, was watching, not for facts or figures, but for fire. And Traoré had brought it. The tension in the room was thick now, like smoke before a fire. Pam shifted in her chair, trying to regain footing, but the atmosphere had already turned against her. The audience didn't cheer, but their silence had weight. A silence of reconsideration. Of reckoning. She squared her shoulders. Let's not pretend you're some moral authority. You came to power through a coup, not a ballot box. Don't preach democracy when you skipped the line. Traoré didn't flinch. You think power is only legitimate if it's granted by your systems. But your systems never worked for us. They were designed to control us. Pam pressed. Then what do you stand for? Mob rule? The end of constitutional order? I stand for people who have never been heard, he replied. You defend constitutions written in ink. I defend lives written in blood. The moderator tried again to cut in, sensing the clash deepening, but no one was listening to him anymore. This wasn't just political theater. It was personal. Pam leaned forward, voice now laced with frustration. If you really stood for your people, you'd build bridges, not burn them. But all you do is antagonize. You push away allies. Traoré's voice dropped low, almost intimate. You were never allies. You were managers. And Africa is not your office. The audience stirred. He sat taller. We've learned that when you say bridge, you mean leash. When you say partnership, you mean submission. And when we say no, you shout law. Pam's jaw tightened. You demand we obey, Traoré said, but never once did you ask why we resist. You don't want to understand us. You want us manageable. The camera zoomed in slowly as he added. We're done being manageable. And just like that, the power in the room had shifted, not with volume, but with truth. Pam looked smaller now. Not defeated, but displaced. And the world? It leaned in closer. The lights dimmed slightly as the broadcast cut to a short segment. But even off-air, the debate wasn't cooling. Pam leaned back, sipping from a glass of water with a rigid posture, while Traoré remained composed, hands folded in front of him, eyes calm but alert. His presence alone unsettled her. She broke the silence. You talk about truth, but truth without law is chaos. Traoré raised an eyebrow. And law without justice is control. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Pam set her glass down, tapping her finger against the table. Then what would your justice look like? No courts. No due process. Just one man deciding what's right? Traoré smiled, but it wasn't kind. You mistake my defiance for dictatorship. What you call order is a structure built to exclude us. You never feared chaos, you feared losing your grip. Pam's voice sharpened. The rule of law isn't a grip. It's what keeps societies from tearing apart. It's what kept your society comfortable while others were torn apart, he replied calmly. For decades, your law protected theft, justified occupation, and punished resistance. She shook her head, defensive now. That's history. That's memory, he interrupted. And memory shapes resistance. There was a pause. A long one. And it wasn't just Pam who felt the shift. The moderator leaned in. President Traoré, are you saying international law doesn't apply to your administration? Traoré turned slightly toward him. I'm saying international law has never applied to us equally. So when we build our own standard, don't call it rebellion. Call it survival. A flicker of unease passed through Pam's face. For the first time, her experience, her credentials, her confidence, they weren't enough. This wasn't a courtroom. This was a battlefield of values. And Traoré wasn't losing. The next segment went live without fanfare. No flashy graphics. No music. Just raw, unfiltered confrontation. Pam straightened her jacket, but her tone betrayed her growing discomfort. It's easy to talk about justice when you're not accountable to anyone. But let me remind you, there are standards. There are treaties. And there are consequences. Traoré didn't blink. Consequences, he echoed. You mean sanctions, embargoes, frozen accounts, economic strangulation dressed up as diplomacy? She narrowed her eyes. If you break global agreements, what do you expect? I expect sovereignty, he said. Not permission. The moderator looked uneasy. President Traoré, are you rejecting global cooperation? I'm rejecting global hypocrisy, he answered. We are constantly told to play by the rules. But the rules were written when we had no pen. And every time we rise, someone like Pam shows up to remind us where we belong. Pam scoffed. That's not what this is. It is, he cut in. Because every time we assert ourselves, you accuse us of aggression. But when your allies invade, you call it intervention. When they steal, it's called investment. The room grew colder. Pam's face flushed. So you'll isolate your country? Close your doors? Is that the plan? No, Traoré said, leaning forward. We'll open them, to partners, not handlers. She didn't reply. Because deep down, she knew the point had landed. Traoré sat back, voice steady. We're not asking for a seat at your table. We're building our own. And we're not begging for recognition. We are the proof. The audience held its breath. Pam's silence said more than words ever could. And for the first time in the debate, it wasn't Traoré defending his stance. It was Bondi defending her relevance. Pam took a deep breath. Her smile was tight, her eyes scanning the audience, as if fishing for approval that wasn't there. You talk a lot about power, Mr. Traoré, she began, her voice honeyed with condescension. But power without responsibility is just noise. You think you're leading a revolution. But to the world, you're a risk. Traoré raised a brow. A risk to what? Control? Monopoly? The illusion that power only flows westward? Pam leaned forward, hands clasped like a teacher scolding a child. There are systems for a reason. Law and order. Law that protects the powerful. Order that silences the rest, he interrupted. The moderator interjected carefully. President Traoré, are you saying global legal systems are illegitimate? I'm saying they were never built to include us, Traoré answered. Pam speaks of responsibility. But where was that responsibility when her country propped up dictators to guard minerals? Where was that accountability when they erased borders with rulers and ink? Pam's jaw tightened. You see, Traoré continued, every time we talk of justice, they point to order. But order without fairness is just a cage. A murmur of agreement ran through part of the studio. Pam tried to regain footing. So what? You reject everything? Treaties? Diplomacy? Cooperation? No, he said. We reject compliance disguised as cooperation. The words hit hard. We've signed documents that let others drain our rivers, mine our lands, and rewrite our textbooks. That's not partnership, it's paperwork for theft. Pam shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. The control she once had was slipping, word by word. Traoré looked straight at her. I'm not reckless. I'm awake. And we are done signing silence with a smile. Pam's posture changed. Gone was the relaxed superiority, her back straightened, voice tightening like a coiled spring. You're dangerously close to encouraging lawlessness, she warned. Undermining institutions only leads to chaos. Traoré didn't flinch. You confuse resistance with chaos. They're not the same. One builds a future. The other defends the past. Pam pointed toward him, her tone sharpening. You speak as if you alone hold the truth. No, he said calmly, but I refuse to swallow the lie. The audience fell silent. Pam, he continued, your world was built on the assumption that our voices don't matter unless they echo yours. That our truth is only valid once it's filtered through your lenses. She interrupted, that's not what I said. It's what you implied, he said, cutting in smoothly. Every time you shout, obey the law, what you're really saying is, obey the system we built. The camera panned across the audience. Some leaned forward, others sat stone-faced, unsure whose world was cracking. Pam's voice rose. That system gave the world stability. Did it? He replied. Stability for who? Ask the mothers who lost sons in proxy wars. Ask farmers who trade their soil for a handful of currency they didn't choose. He stood, but didn't raise his voice. Instead, his stillness carried the weight of his words. You mistake my calm for surrender. But I am not here to obey. I am here to reveal. Pam shifted again. For a moment, she seemed to search for a lifeline, a cue card, a statistic, anything to anchor her argument. But there was none. We were told to be grateful for laws written in foreign tongues, for flags we never raised, for maps we never drew, Traoré said. Now we speak for ourselves, and suddenly, it's chaos. Pam's lips pressed tight. She didn't respond. There was nothing left to shout over. Silence lingered, thick, charged. Pam Bondi stared at Traoré, and for the first time, her eyes betrayed uncertainty. You speak of truth, she said finally, quieter now, but truth without order becomes noise. You can't just tear down a system without building one in its place. Traoré nodded. Exactly. That's why we're not tearing, we're transforming. But transformation threatens those who built castles on still sand. He walked slowly across the stage, not pacing, but claiming space. You say law brings order. I say law must serve justice. And when law loses sight of justice, it becomes obedience for obedience's sake, a leash dressed in parchment. Pam turned to the crowd, grasping for ground. So what, then? Ignore the law whenever it's inconvenient. He stopped, faced her. No. Disobey when it's immoral. Disobey when it chains the innocent. Disobey when it protects the powerful and silences the weak. A wave of applause burst from a corner of the room, spreading like a spark caught wind. Pam blinked, surprised, not just by the support, but by who it came from. A mix of young professionals, veterans, immigrants, faces she didn't expect. Traoré stepped closer to her lectern. You want to talk law, Pam? Then let's talk about the laws that made wealth legal, but dignity optional. The laws that jailed protesters but bailed out polluters. The laws that turned countries into resources and people into numbers. Pam's voice cracked. We gave order to a broken world. You gave silence, he replied. And now, we're raising our voices. He turned to the audience. We do not follow blindly anymore. We follow truth. And truth, real truth, needs no permission. As he returned to his seat, the room wasn't quiet out of shock. It was reverence. Even Pam, despite herself, seemed to recognize it, not agreement, but acknowledgement. This wasn't just rhetoric. This was a shift. A few hours after the debate, clips of Traoré's final words flooded social media. Hashtags trended. Edits circulated. Commentators scrambled to find the right framing, but most missed the obvious: something had shifted. Back in her dressing room, Pam Bondi sat with her team, rewatching the moment Traoré spoke the words. We do not follow blindly anymore. We follow truth. And truth, real truth, needs no permission. She didn't say much. For once, the lawyer who lived by the book wasn't sure which page to turn to. Meanwhile, in a modest studio across town, Traoré sat with a small group of young reformers. His posture was relaxed, but his tone was precise. This isn't about one debate, he said. It's about showing that principles are stronger than positions. That law, without heart, is just ink. And that the era of obedience without questioning is over. One of the students asked, "Do you think she understood?" Traoré smiled faintly. She heard. Whether she listens, we'll see. Across the Atlantic, leaders and officials from various nations replayed the broadcast. Some dismissed him. Others took notes. A few, those with ears trained by history, recognized something deeper. The language of liberation wasn't coming from a protest. It was coming from a platform. And that made it dangerous. In the days that followed, Pam Bondi released a short statement praising the importance of debate in democracy. But she didn't mention Traoré by name. She didn't have to. The internet already had. Mural artists in Lagos were painting his words. Activists in Washington quoted him. Legal scholars in Geneva debated his points on international platforms. Traoré had not won with volume. He had won with vision. And as his plane took off that evening, heading back to Ouagadougou, he looked out the window, not with pride, but with purpose. He had reminded the world of something simple. Power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing. They told him to obey. They demanded silence. They expected submission. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't come to echo their words. He came to confront them. While some wrapped injustice in legal language, Traoré unwrapped the truth, and laid it bare. Pam Bondi shouted for the law. But he stood for justice. And when the dust settled, only one voice still echoed. Not the one that barked commands. But the one that calmly said, "We follow truth. Not orders."